The opening scene of the superhero movie starts with a young man named Rick Riker running after the school bus. After a graceless chase, Rick got inside the bus and sat beside his best friend, Trey. While Trey kept on talking, Rick couldn't stop looking at the girl he was in love with, Jill, who is dating Lance, Rick's bully. The students went on a field trip to an animal research lab called Amalgamated, owned by Lance's uncle, Lou Landers, who is a visionary scientist. During the trip, Rick noticed Jill looking at a bird and approached her with the pretext that he was just going to take a picture for the school newspaper, so Jill walked away to let him do his thing. Dr. Strom, the head of the research department that was touring them, stated the rules: they aren't allowed to feed the animals, and flash photography isn't allowed either. But before Rick could hear the second rule, he had already taken a picture of the bird with a flash on, setting the bird on fire. Seeing that the bird was gone, Jill walked away, assuming that the bird had flown away. Rick stomped on the burnt bird to stop the fire and kicked it, accidentally hitting Lance, who strutted towards him in annoyance. Jill came back and went in between Lance and Rick, but Lance didn't listen to her and made a move to punch Rick. But then someone put a hand on his shoulder, and when Lance turned, he realized it was his uncle, and he immediately walked away. Dr. Strom introduced Landers to the students, and once Dr. Strom walked away with the students, Landers coughed blood and pretended to be fine when Rick asked him if he was fine. Landers was familiar with Rick's last name and confirmed if Rick is the son of Blaine and Julia, the names of Rick's parents. After their short talk, Landers walked away, and Lance pushed Rick onto a pile of feces. In an attempt to clean the dirt, Rick accidentally sprayed himself with an animal attraction liquid called Compound H209, which attracted all kinds of animals in the research lab to pounce on him. While Rick was having a hard time dealing with the aroused animals, Dr. Strom was introducing the 7 new genetically enhanced super dragonflies to the students when Jill pointed out that there were only 6 dragonflies. One of the radioactive dragonflies had managed to escape and bit Rick on the neck. Dr. Strom then opened the door that led to the area where they keep their livestock, and the animals in there attacked Rick. Rick went back home and went straight to his room, feeling sick after getting bitten by the dragonfly. His uncle Albert sat down beside him on the bed and talked to him when he suddenly fainted. Meanwhile, at Amalgamated, Landers was having a meeting with the board of directors. Landers revealed that he had a terminal illness and only had an hour left to live. So he created a machine that was supposed to alter the DNA and restore the body to perfect health. He tested the machine for himself, and the machine malfunctioned. One of the board members mocked him, thinking that the machine didn't work, but then Landers grabbed his hand and drained his life. The machine perfectly worked, it restored Landers' health, and he even gained superpowers, but in exchange, Landers had to drain a person's life per day. Dr. Strom screamed as Landers killed all the board members. After 5 days of being unconscious, Rick woke up without feeling any pain. He checked the dragonfly bite on his neck and was confused when he saw that it wasn't there anymore. He searched the internet to find out what was wrong with him when he received a message from an unknown person telling him that they knew what was wrong with Rick. Rick flipped over the photo album of his father when he saw Jill half naked inside her room, which was just right beside his room. He watched in excitement as Jill changed her underwear when his Aunt Lucille called him for breakfast. He yelled back to tell his aunt that he was busy before running back to the window, only to find a random guy and no sight of Jill anymore. In Empire City High School, there was a science fair event where the principal introduced a paralyzed scientist named Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking made a very inappropriate speech that shocked everyone. After his speech, the students mingled around, and Rick was staring at Jill so intently that he didn't notice Lance, who bumped him. Rick walked away and held on to a drinking fountain. He pulled his hand away but couldn't, as if his hand was stuck. When he finally managed to pull his hand away, he saw scales on his fingers, and he pulled his other hand away, destroying the drinking fountain and accidentally hitting Lance with it. Students gathered around as Lance tried to punch Rick, who kept dodging every time. But Rick got distracted by Trey and ended up getting punched. Rick stumbled around trying to stop his hand from sticking onto other people's shirts and accidentally pushing Stephen Hawking off his wheelchair and onto a beehive, which sent everyone into panic trying to avoid the bees. Rick left the school and went to an alley, where he discovered he could crawl on the wall. When he saw an old lady crossing the road and about to get hit by a truck, he pushed the old lady out of the way and stopped the truck with his body. Bystanders surrounded him, amazed by how he saved the old lady. When Rick saw the old lady getting sucked into a vehicle, he went back home to Uncle Albert and Trey, who were suspicious of Rick's sudden strength and speed. Uncle Albert tried to stab Rick to confirm it, and the knife bent. Uncle Albert encouraged Rick to use it to help other people, but Rick got upset because he didn't want any superpowers and walked out of the house. In their backyard, Rick looked at the ring his father left him and remembered what happened to his parents back then. After watching an opera, they left through the stage door and were targeted by an armed thief. Young Rick remembered what his father told him about being a hero and tried to act like one. He fought with the thief for the gun, accidentally firing it, which caused his parents' deaths. That's when his dying father gave him the ring and told him to claim his destiny by becoming a hero. Rick threw the ring away, not wanting to be a hero, but the ring bounced back towards him and hit him in the face. He heard crashes in Jill's house beside his and saw an upset Jill walking out of the house. Jill opened up to Rick about wanting to be a dancer and rebelling against her parents by dating Lance, with Rick getting electrified by the electric fence behind her as she talked. Lance arrived to fetch Jill with a nice car, and Jill told Rick that maybe one day he could take her for a ride in his own car before leaving. Rick only had a faulty bike, so he searched the internet for a cheap car when he received a video message from Professor Xavier, who invited him to his school that helps individuals with superpowers. The next day, Rick went to Empire Savings and Loan for a car loan but was rejected. An armed robber fired a gun and ran away with the stolen money. When Rick heard a gunshot outside, he rushed out to see his Uncle Albert on the ground after getting shot. Rick worriedly crouched down beside his Uncle Albert, who told him to listen to his father and become a hero. Meanwhile, Landers was in his office when his plasma level decreased. So when his secretary came in, he drained her life energy to steady his plasma level. At the hospital, Rick was staring at his unconscious Uncle Albert when Jill arrived to comfort him. The doctor arrived and told Rick that Albert might die in a week, and Rick was devastated to hear that. Rick called himself a screw-up for everything that had happened to him, and Jill comforted him by saying that it was never too late to be the person he meant to be. A while later, Rick left the hospital and met Professor Xavier. The next day, Professor Xavier brought Rick to his school for the gifted and introduced various gifted students like Wolverine, Sneezo, Storm, and more. Rick also met Professor Xavier's wife, who beat up an invisible girl. After Professor Xavier got thrown away by his own baby, his wife approached Rick and slapped him, telling him to make a costume if he wanted to be a superhero. Rick created his costume and went to a rooftop building to look over the city. That's where he met John Storm, another gifted person who told Rick that he was sitting on his gargoyle. They decided to share the gargoyle and look over the city, but it was so awkward. John Storm showed Rick his power, which is flame, but Rick got scared of his own superpower and panicked, falling down the building and probably dying. Rick apologized and went back to the gargoyle, attempting to fly but failing. After that day, Rick started saving people and became known as Dragonfly. One day, he saw people reading a newspaper about him and found that a newspaper station was paying for photos of dragonflies. He went to the Empire City Times and talked to the editor-in-chief, showing him close-up photos of dragonflies. One of the employees told the editor-in-chief about a police standoff at Empire University and immediately left. Landers was dressed as Hourglass as he had a standoff with the police after stealing Stephen Hawking's Ceruleum. Dragonfly arrived and punched Hourglass's back, causing him to fly away. He looked at the bystanders and saw Jill, who was staring at him. He went inside the room where Hourglass flew in, and the two of them spun around, grabbing each other. They got dizzy and stopped for a while before Hourglass threw titanium blades at Rick, who attempted to dodge but miserably failed, enabling Hourglass to escape. Back inside his room, Rick was talking with Trey when he saw Jill in her room. Aunt Lucille came into the room and saw how he looked at Jill. She advised Rick to be careful with the people he cares about, as his enemies would surely use his loved ones against him. Later that night, he went to give flowers to Jill to show her support for her audition. Jill encouraged Rick to open up to him, feeling that he was hiding a secret, but Rick avoided telling her the truth about him. Jill parted from him, and Rick stood behind her, watching as Jill got chased by a group of men. He dressed as a dragonfly and saved Jill. After beating the men up, the rain started pouring, and Dragonfly left. Jill looked for him, and Dragonfly appeared upside down. Jill moved in to kiss him, but Dragonfly went down further. When Jill pushed him up, he disappeared and appeared again, normally this time. Jill held onto his neck as the two of them kissed. The sound of a police siren was heard, and Dragonfly left. Meanwhile, Landers was in his office, doing his own research to find a way for immortality. He saw that he needed to kill 47,272 people to find immortality and devised a plan for his mass murder. At Rick's home, Jill was helping Aunt Lucille prepare for Thanksgiving. Aunt Lucille was putting all kinds of things, even her cat, inside the chicken as the two ladies talked. The doorbell rang, and Jill opened the door to welcome Lance and Landers, who decided to join them. They heard a thud upstairs, and Landers got suspicious, so he volunteered to check if it was Rick, who was supposed to be out at that time. Rick just arrived and went straight to the restroom to take a piss, but Landers entered the room, and he grabbed onto the ceiling so Landers wouldn't find him. But he was unable to hold in his piss and decided to make a rain every time Landers turned around. Fortunately, Landers didn't see him and went back down to where Rick entered through the front door to avoid suspicion. They started eating together as they talked, and Rick revealed that he was working as Dragonfly's unofficial photographer. Landers got even more suspicious, and he and Rick started pointing out the bruises on their bodies until Landers and Lance decided to leave already. After Thanksgiving, Aunt Lucille was sleeping while Rick and Jill talked. They confessed to each other and moved in to kiss, but Aunt Lucille kept letting out gas, and Hourglass also crashed in, causing Jill to faint. Rick threw something hard at Hourglass but got hit instead and lost consciousness, failing to protect his Aunt Lucille, who got killed by Hourglass. After what happened, Uncle Albert finally woke up from his coma, and they held a funeral for Aunt Lucille. During the burial, Albert caused a scene, which resulted in Aunt Lucille's body receiving a free cremation. After the burial, Jill comforted Rick, but her love got rejected by Rick, who decided to lie about not being in love with Jill after realizing what could happen to his loved ones. Rick got depressed and wallowed in self-pity. Uncle Albert and Trey confronted him, and Uncle Albert made a speech that encouraged Rick to become a hero by stopping Hourglass from murdering thousands of people. They saw the news about an event that would hold thousands of people, and Rick went to become a hero. Landers, Lou, and Jill were at the event where Landers won the Douchebag of the Year award. Backstage, Rick approached Landers to seek help in finding Hourglass, and Landers told him that Hourglass was a mum. Rick dressed as a dragonfly and assaulted the man right in front of everyone. Guards tackled Dragonfly, who used his strength to throw him away, resulting in chaos in the whole room as all the guests fought with each other. Dragonfly arrived at a hero con, where he found Hourglass. Hourglass caused the ceiling to explode, and debris fell onto Dragonfly, trapping him. Jill arrived, saw Hourglass throwing a titanium blade at Dragonfly, and jumped to block it. Hourglass left through the destroyed ceiling as Dragonfly cradled Jill's unconscious body. Stephen Hawking approached him and told him that the hero comes from within, motivating Dragonfly to stop Hourglass. Dragonfly went to the rooftop, carrying Jill's unconscious body, and tried to stop Hourglass from activating the machine that would kill thousands of people, but failed as he was thrown away. Jill regained consciousness, and Dragonfly pulled her up. Then Jill pointed at the machine, which showed there were only 10 seconds before Hourglass successfully received immortality. Hourglass threw a time bomb at Dragonfly, and Dragonfly attempted to throw it back at Hourglass but failed as the time bomb got stuck on his crotch. So he rushed towards Hourglass, wrapping his legs around Hourglass' shoulders, and the time bomb exploded, killing Hourglass and destroying the machine. Jill got thrown off the side of the building, and Dragonfly jumped to save her, forgetting the fact that he can't fly. While falling, Jill saw the ring on Dragonfly's finger and discovered that Dragonfly is actually Rick. The two of them confessed their feelings to each other and had a whole conversation as they fell. They pulled each other into a kiss, and Rick miraculously grew wings while they were kissing. Rick flew back to the rooftop, where Uncle Albert and Stephen Hawking congratulated him for saving thousands of people. Rick, Jill, and Uncle Albert walked away, not noticing Stephen Hawking, who fell from the rooftop. The ending scene of the film sees Rick flying with Jill when they get hit by a helicopter.